Hey, welcome to another episode of the Brandywine Angler. Today we're gonna cover a rehabilitation of an old fiberglass canoe that I bought many years ago, and this winter decided to try to rehabilitate a little bit, mostly as practice for doing some compounding work on some gel coat on a couple of boats I have. I figured I'd practice on an old beat up canoe and see what I could do, but the results were pretty cool. So stick around and enjoy the video. A good place to start is what this canoe looked like before I began the restoration. And here's a very good look at that. There's incredible chalkiness. There's all kinds of scratches. The aluminum is just super dull, and it just needed a lot of help. It was a perfectly capable boat, but in terms of its condition, it was quite poor. Today I'm going to be taking some metal polish and polishing the aluminum gunnels on the top side or outside of the canoe that we're working on here. It makes more sense to do the metal first because it produces its kind of black paste when you polish. So I'm going to do the metal first, then I can sort of tape off the metal when I go to work on the fiberglass. Here's a good look at what that black paste looks like when it gets on the fiberglass. I will freely admit to not being an expert on the subject, but I decided after some research to use this Simichrome polish as a starting point for trying to bring this aluminum trim on this canoe back to life. And so I used that plus a wool buffing pad on a drill. So this is kind of an interesting example here. In this section here, there's still a few tiny imperfections, you can see them, but it's pretty darn good. I mean, hard to argue with that. But then when you get into this section I did twice. I did once and then I put some fresh metal polisher on and did a second pass. This section we're getting into now, you can see a lot more imperfections remaining. That's only had one round of the polish. So, I mean, it's definitely better than that, which is not yet done, but 2 passes really does make a difference in terms of getting, you know, pretty close to factory. And my suspicion is that if you have enough patience, you could probably make the whole thing kind of get to about that level, which would be pretty impressive. But okay, this section's now had 2 passes. You can see it's much cleaner than after the first pass. This section got very close to factory. Here's the next section that's had 1 pass. Pretty good shape, but not quite to the level of the 2 passes. You might wonder how long you run before you know that you're done. I don't really have a great answer to that, other than at first when you put the polish on, you can feel the polish really biting into the metal and it's kind of grabbing the disc of the drill, the polishing head. And then over time it loosens up, and then at the end there's really not a lot left of the polish. There's no paste to speak of left. So I'm running it down till there's no paste left for the most part, and then calling it and then reapplying. All right, that's what we have at this point from where we started. Not perfect, but really, really good. And that's with 2 passes of the metal polish. I think that if I did a 3rd pass, I could really step it up. These sections from kind of here forward, which is the bow sections, are in really, really good condition despite the age of this boat, and they polished up really, really beautifully. So I'm super pleased with that. So once I finished doing the outer trim strip or gunnel with the metal polish, I moved on to working with compound and a buffer. And I started with 3M heavy cut and buffed out the fiberglass with that. Now, I'm not an expert at that at all. In fact, this is the first time I've ever used a buffer and compound on fiberglass in my life. But I will say that I watched many hours of videos about this, particularly from a YouTuber who goes by the handle Local Boy Did Good, who has very detailed information about how to use a buffer and buffing compound on gel coat, particularly old gel coat that's in really bad shape. His proposition is that you can use buffing compound in almost every circumstance instead of wet sanding. And based on what I've seen with this canoe, as far as I know, he's right, because I followed his methodology using his suggested materials, and well, you'll see. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of video of the first day of compounding, but I do have this photo. You can get an idea of what the progress was. Here's another photo after day one. You can see I taped off the gunnels. That was because the aluminum gets a black stain on the buffing pad if you let the buffing pad touch it. Good morning, everybody. We are back. This is day 2 of compounding on the Indian River canoe. And as you can see, we made a lot of progress. It's definitely much better shape than it was. However, you can see there's still quite a few scratches and marks. Some of those go through the gel coat, but I want to see if I can improve on it a little bit. The other thing we're going to do, I've made the decision to go ahead and use the eraser wheel and take off the old Indian River sticker, which is basically clear now. You can barely see any remnants of it. And the Skiff Life redfish. Go ahead and replace that probably. And maybe use the Cricut cutting machine to come up with a logo that resembles the original Indian River logo for it. We'll see. All right. Hey, so we're back on the canoe refurbishment, and a couple of things to show you here since we last touched base, which was when we were compounding the exterior glass. So as you can see, we've gotten some replacement decals. I got the original Indian River logo, well, actually something that's in the same font from a boat lettering provider online. And I like my redfish decal. This is from Skiff Life, so I got a replacement redfish decal for each side as well. So we've got this basically at the point where it's ready to apply whatever finishing protectant we're going to use. And I've turned it over and gotten it taped off, and I'm going to now finish with the polishing of all of the gunnels and the other aluminum. You know, obviously we did the outside, as you can see, but the top of the gunnels and the inside edge are, you know, in need of some attention. So we'll get those polished up. I put this sheeting down because that metal polish is black and gooey, and it's hard to remove once it gets on things. And I have scrubbed out the inside of the canoe, and so it's pretty clean. It's probably about as clean as it's going to get, and I just don't want to get a bunch of black stuff all in it. So I figured I'd clean it, tape it off, and then polish the metal, and should be in pretty good shape. All right, well, several hours later, I have the one gunnel done, or mostly done. There are a couple spots Like right there, I feel like I want to come back and hit that. But for the most part, it's looking good. And again, by way of contrast, you can get a pretty good look. That's the difference between before and after. Now, one thing I discovered is that it's super hard to get this inside lip. I don't know if I just don't have the patience for it or what, but that's just, I can get the top rail. This inside lip is very, very difficult. So I spent a really long time on the polishing of the top of the gunnel, the inside rail, and the cross member that's aluminum, using the drill buffer methodology with the Simichrome. And it just didn't end up looking that good. I couldn't get it to the level of polish that I got the outside edge. And ultimately, I did some research and went out and got some very fine grit sanding pads, foam sanding pads, and used those. I think I started at, I can't remember, it was 300 or 400, but something in that range, and then went up from there. And that actually worked. That got all the corrosion off, and ultimately, with some patience, and it actually was a whole bunch quicker than the wool buffing wheel with the metal polish, I was able to get the top of the gunnel, the cross member, and that inside lip, which was very, very challenging with the drill buffer approach with the sandpaper. I think that if I'd have started with the sandpaper on the top and the inside edge and the cross member, I would have saved a whole bunch of time. Okay, so we're basically done, as good as I can get it, I think. Given where we started, I'm pretty excited about it, pretty pleased with the outcome. So let's take a look. You can see I switched out the hardware on the bow and stern. A little bit newer stuff. Polished up the gunnel rails pretty well. Put some teak oil on the seats, bring them back. Polished up the thwart. Didn't really polish the inside edge, but did get the corrosion off it. So while it's not shining like chrome, it's definitely cleaner than it was. So I finished it off with some Fiberglass Plus, which is a ceramic type coating on the gel coat, and some woody wax on the metal trim, and it ended up looking great, and it looks almost like a new boat. So hey, I'm a rookie. I think it came out pretty well. I would say don't be scared of giving something like that a try. It might be worthwhile, and maybe you could learn some skills and end up with something pretty nice looking in the end. Thanks for watching.